Live. So glad that you guys are here with us again. We had a kind of a fun week last week where we did kind of a Thanksgiving episode. Grace was out traveling. So it's good to have the gang all together again. And I consider Shannon part of my gang. I always have fun talking with him. But if you're joining us today, I hope you're joining us today. If you are here, you're watching us, would you please give us a like and a share, sprinkle the love across the interwebs, because a lot of people are really thinking hard, the ones I've been talking to, about starting a podcast, and maybe this next year, that's kind of one of their bucket list things. And so we are really excited to dive deep again, because we got so into it last time, we didn't finish all our questions we had for Shannon, and people in the comments were going like, hey, we want more. And I was talking to people on Twitter, and they said, hey, ask these questions to Shannon. So luckily, I know Shannon Hernandez, and he said he would come right back and do it for us. So, Shannon, so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. And I'm lucky to know you and Grace.
Well, I'm lucky to know, yes. Grace is the one that holds the ship together here. When I have to go without her, it's always a little rickety. So I'm glad. Yeah, so we got some of our friends stopping by already. We have Katrina saying, morning from Washington State. Thank you for spending your morning with us. Appreciate that. Our pal from across the pond, Ian Anderson Gray, he says, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. He's so proper, those English. They're so proper. Thank you, Ian, for stopping by. Bobby is saying good morning to Shannon Hernandez, so thank you, Bobby.
Hi, Bobby. Yeah, that's one of my listeners.
Yeah, and photography by Brian. We gave a shout-out to him last week. He's watching over on YouTube. Thanks, Brian, for stopping by again. Got your fan club here. Catherine's saying Shannon rocks. So, man, even in the morning, Shannon rocks. Early in the morning.
I guess, yeah. I mean, they're awake.
Apparently, last week's show was shady, Jeff. Without
shady.
Me. That's what Mike Alton has to say about that. You're shady without me.
Oh, yes, shaky. Or maybe that's what he was trying to type. I'm shady, though, a little bit, too. So Ian says he's really interested in this topic because he launched his podcast back in May 2019, and he wants some growth tips. So we will try to give that to you today, Ian. So it's going to be an interesting show because this is such an exciting topic. And our pal Joseph is watching from over on LinkedIn. Joseph, thank you so much. You are a faithful watcher. We appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for watching from Philly. So without further ado, I'm going to hit go on the podcast machine, and we'll get started because Sabrina is actually here, and that's what we wait for, is Sabrina saying, hi, it's me, Sabrina. So, Sabrina, thank you so much for showing up one more time. I appreciate you. So, here we go. Welcome to Social Media News Live. I'm Jeff C., and you're not.
And I'm Grace Duffy, and this is the show that keeps you up to date in the world of social media. And today's show, I'm so excited to talk about today's topic. Jeff, I'll let you introduce it.
Yeah, Shannon Hernandez is joining up with us again, and we're going to be picking up right where we left off the last time he was here. So last time we covered podcasting trends and getting started, and this was just a few episodes back. So if you missed that one, make sure you go back and check it out because Shannon dropped a ton of great info and tips there. So today we're getting started into all the tools and the tech and monetization and motivation that goes into a successful and profitable podcast. So Shannon, how are you doing today, my friend? I'm so excited that you said you're going to come back. Even after last show, you decided, hey, I might as well come back.
Yeah, man, I had a lot of fun last time. So thanks for inviting me back. I guess, I don't know. I would imagine that I'm in like an upper tier of repeat guests.
Yes.
I guess. I don't know.
There aren't that many. I think Lou was one. I think Ian maybe have been another. So yeah, you are in like a special class now. We'll send you the mug later. Yeah.
I'm honored. I feel like I need to make myself a plaque for this.
You should color it in, make some crowns, and
I will. I've got 3 pens ready to go right now.
There you go. So if you guys don't know Shannon Hernandez is a 20-plus year radio veteran. He's a podcaster and a podcast producer. With his work in radio broadcasting, he's got the knowledge and the experience to bridge traditional media tactics and strategies with the developing online content and marketing. So you can find his videos on podcasting and podcast marketing on YouTube. He's got a fabulous YouTube channel. And he currently holds down the weeknight time slot for 98 KUPD FM and is the sound design and editor for Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast. So, Shannon, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
By the way, we did a big shout out last week to them, but I'm going to do it again, is our friends who make this show possible, who are over on Ecamm. So you can find out more about Ecamm at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. That's what we're using to produce the show, send it out everywhere, and chop it up. All that stuff that Ecamm allows us to do. They are doing something really, really cool right now. They're calling it Vlogmas. For Vlogmas right now in their community. So if you happen to grab a hold of that really cool Black Friday Day sale and need some help getting started, make sure that you do a search on Facebook for Ecamm Live Community, and you'll find they're putting out videos every day. They're really helping train people in the software. So make sure you guys go check out Ecamm. If you didn't get part of the sale, you can still sign up for it. You won't get the Black Friday pricing, but I tell you, I would do it anyway because it's such an awesome piece of software. You can find out more at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. Thanks for them for helping make this show possible. Alrighty, Grace, let's jump right in this because we've got the comments are humming already. People wanting to talk about this.
And I have to say, there was a huge demand to have Shannon back because part 1 of this podcast series we're doing was just so amazing. So we want to kick off today's show talking about the tech and the tools that you need to create a professional podcast with or without a fantastic sound designer, just like Shannon. So, Shannon, can you give us your tips on the best podcasting tools for getting started? So let's start with the equipment, like mics and audio recording. What do you recommend as far as mics and recording this beautiful audio that we have going here?
So we'll just make it simple. Go download my guide, and that has everything there for you. Done. No, I'm kidding.
No, you do have a guide. It's great. And they can find that. Isn't it on shanman.com? Can't you find it there?
Yeah, it's on the shanman.com, so you can go on over there. But I mean, for those who are watching who don't have time to download that guide has basically the equipment that, if you're looking to get started, especially if you're a business podcast trying to get started and wanting to get started into the new year. This was a question that came up in one of the Facebook groups yesterday where someone was looking for affordable equipment. Now, there's a difference between getting affordable equipment and just getting equipment, and so starting out and getting your equipment can be kind of an investment when you look at it, but you have to remember that the investment is a one-time purchase. It should last you a pretty long time, and you shouldn't have to buy equipment other than maybe cords that might fail and whatnot. But if we were to start from ground zero and you wanted to start on the very, 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 very basic level, you could really just get, a USB microphone and use Zoom. I mean, that's as simple as it's going to get. If you're not using Zoom, you could use probably a Google Meet. That might work. There are many different services that are out there. You could use, Ecamm, Restream. These different services might be able to help you out. But that's really the basics of starting up a podcast. A microphone, a good microphone, and maybe a service that can capture the audio. If you're someone who's just like, oh, I just don't know exactly, I don't want to play in equipment too much, it seems too complicated. And I'll tell you that when you're using say equipment, it's not as complicated as you think. In fact, it makes the audio sound a lot better. This was a topic that I had brought up a few weeks ago when I spoke to an entrepreneurial class at Arizona State. And, there's a difference in between, the sound quality, the sound quality that you would be getting on, say, like a Zoom is a lot lower than, say, recording direct into a software like Adobe Audition. But if you were to start from the very beginning and start, say, like, I want to get equipment, I want to get microphones, I'm going to have a group of people that I'm going to be bringing around into my own home studio, just like that comment was in the group yesterday. You can start very simple. You can start with 4 microphones, and the microphones can be very, very simple as far as, price is concerned. So if we're going to say, like, let's say we're going to have 2 microphones, one for you and a co-host. All right. And maybe you're doing calls remotely. You got to first budget out for microphones. 2 microphones. There are a number of different microphones that are out there. Excuse me. There are the AT2100X. Those are 2 great microphones that you can use. They're USB capable, or you could use a Shure SM58 microphone. They're about the same in price. The quality is great on both of them. The only thing I think you would have to worry about with the AT2100X is that it may malfunction at some point, but So might the SM58 too. So just know that the equipment will sometimes bug out on occasion, but I've had the same equipment for years and it
Right.
hasn't bugged out on me. And then anytime I have to buy something brand new, it's not like it's a major investment. That's like maybe once every 10 years. So it's not something that is major. The other thing that I would consider is getting a mixing board. Now, Jeff and I have two different types of mixing boards. I believe Jeff uses a Rodecaster Pro for this podcast. I use a Yamaha MG10XU mixing board. That's a live mixing board. In fact, when I first started podcasting, I was using the analog version of that mixing board. So this mixing board that is upgraded is now USB capable. So I can record directly through that mixing board from my microphone to that mixing board into my recording software, which would be Adobe Audition. But you could use it also on Zoom calls. You could use it on StreamYards. You can use it on Restreams. You can use it on just about any service that is out there. Other things that you would probably need, you would need to get some cords so that you could plug in your microphone into those mixing boards. And then a couple of other things, you might need to get some mic stands or maybe even some mic booms, and you're pretty much good to go. So when you think about that and you think about the pricing behind all of that equipment, it's really going to vary and it's going to depend on your budget. You just have to remember that you're going to purchase this once. It's a one-time purchase. And that would be good for you. Some things I would recommend that you stay away from, and it's not that I don't like the products, but they just are. I would say that they're just not suitable for podcasting. There are podcasters out there who try to do a lot of things on the cheap. All right. And so when it's just my opinion that you stay away from things like the Focusrite. That it's a little box. People say, "Oh, that's perfect for podcasting," but then they want to do and they want to advance into more things. They want to advance into doing live streams. They want to advance into mixing in more sound, and that box just won't do it for you. It won't have that capability for you. So I would recommend that the base level is the Yamaha MG10XU. If you want to go a step higher, then I would say go into the Rodecaster Pro. That's about, I think, $300 more. So, if you're looking for pricing, you could go download that guide on my website, and of course, it could tell you everything there. I see in the comments that one of my viewers on YouTube, Bearberg, he says pop filters. Don't forget pop filters. Pop filters are those are optional. You can get pop filters if you want. I don't personally use pop filters, just because I know how to use a microphone. Pop filters are really more about, it's a preference really, and especially if you're doing voiceover work. If you're doing voiceover work for a podcast that has acting, maybe doing an audiobook, you might want to have a pop filter. But if you know how to use the microphone, you know how to stand, you know how to have a distance between you and the microphone, you don't really need a pop filter. But I know a lot of people like to use pop filter. Plus, it makes them feel cool, makes them feel like, hey, we got that. But, there's some people who do notice maybe a difference in using a pop filter too. So just kind of, gauge it on what you feel is necessary. If you're just getting started, maybe you don't need a pop filter. Maybe you do. You're just going to have to gauge that on your own. And then, of course, maybe you'll need a camera. Most laptops are equipped with a camera. I use a Logitech C920 when I'm in this room. And I'm plugged into my computer. And then, of course, on my laptop, I'm just using the normal MacBook Pro camera. So those are the things that you can use when you're starting up a podcast as far as equipment is concerned.
So I have some questions really quick about this. So one of the things you said about is that, a lot of this stuff lasts for a long time. So, you told me when we were, I'm going to bring up, if Dustin's watching Google Plus one more time, back when I first started, you said, hey, get this Yeti, the Pro. And I did, because you were using, you're using it right there. And I used it forever until Heil was nice enough to send me this, the PR40. So, when you're investing in this, it is an investment. It'll last longer than your computer. You'll upgrade your computer before you will your audio equipment for the most part. The other thing I want to ask you about would be headphones, because how important those are. Like when you start doing this, do you need to have, like a $400 set of Sony, cans to put on your head? What do you suggest for that?
Yeah, you don't need those super expensive headphones. I know people who I work with, they're like, no, I've got to have like $400 headphones. And I'm like, I don't know why, you're just listening, but right. That's what they want. They want those $400 headphones. These headphones, these are the Sony MD, what is they? I think they're the MDR 7506s. And these are perfect. I've been using this brand since I started in radio. So, I mean, you can use these. I use a different brand at work because I had bought those at one point in time, and I was like, I'm going to use those. And I ended up just bringing these home because these sound really great. They got really good low end, and of course, they are noise canceling as well. So these run anywhere between, I think, $80 to $100. That's something that you can deal with for about 10 years. I mean, let's put it this way in perspective. The headphones that I'm using at work, I'm on my second pair of those. And I had used them and I thought, oh, I really like these, but I still had these at home. These are my good headphones, but I'm on my second pair of those. Those burned out within, God, I think within 5 years, and these continue to last. They just keep going and keep going. So, remember that some of the equipment, you don't have to buy super expensive stuff, but if you get a decent pair, you can use it. Don't use earbuds, because what happens, especially if you're doing audio through a mixing board, if you're using earbuds, those don't have the sound cancellation in the headphones. And when you get close to the microphone, you can hear feedback. And I know there's a lot of podcasters out there, they like to use the earbuds. If that's what if all you can afford, great. But it's going to create problems later on down the line. I had a call with someone a few weeks ago where we were just catching up, and she was using her earbuds, her Apple earbuds, and they were cutting in and out, and they just weren't the best sound quality. So, and she couldn't hear me. I couldn't hear her. It was more trouble than what it was worth. And she just ended up taking them out, turning the Bluetooth off, and then just started talking between me and her, or her and her camera microphone. So, just know what you're going to be getting into if you're just going to be using, plugged in earbuds or, Bluetooth earbuds. They're not going to be the same as if you're just plugged in. It's all preference, though. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all preference.
Well, one of the things is these are just monitor headphones, but they plug into my board because I thought, oh, I'd be cool, and I'll use the new Apple iPods, and they cut out during a show, and you can't hear anything. So if you're doing an interview type of podcast, then you don't want to have your guests, you can't hear them anymore. So it's really important, I think, to be wired for even any sort of interview thing. So the last question
you have actually are what a lot of recording artists use. They use a lot of those. And so those are great to have because they fit molded to your ear, and it's really, you can get every sound basically in your ear.
And these are actually they're not for really high def stuff, but they're just for monitoring, but they're like $15 at Amazon. And so if you're watching on Amazon, they're in my queue. I mean, they're really cheap. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, let's say you're really sold on podcasting. You enjoy it. You like it. You're starting to see some traction. What would be the thing that you would upgrade first?
Oh, that's a good one. What would be the first thing that I would upgrade if I were just starting out? I would upgrade into my microphone. I mean, that's the thing. Upgraded my microphone, and I would upgrade into my software. Software is a very important thing, I personally believe, if you're looking for better quality audio. So the question that comes up constantly is, how do I get better audio for my podcast? I'm using this, I'm using that, and I'm just not getting the quality audio that I'm expecting to get out of my microphone. So, you go into these groups in Facebook, and people will be like, oh, the Blue Yeti is trash, or they'll say the ATR 2100 doesn't work. Use this microphone. What people don't realize is that when they're recording into software, they're recording into SaaS products, software as a service. I could name a bunch of them. They're all out there. You can name Auphonic, Zencaster. You can name them all that are out there. You're still getting quality. You're still getting audio that is going into that SaaS software that is controlled by an internet connection, and you're not getting the best audio quality. The same can be said if you're using a StreamYard, if you're using any SaaS product. Now, if you're looking for clean audio on your end as the host, then it would be important for you to record from your microphone into your mixing board into a software like Adobe Audition or even Audacity if you're looking for that. Those are things that you can do to improve the quality if you're looking to make it more legit. All right. As far as your guest audio is concerned, this is another question that comes up. How can I get my guest audio to sound better? Well, that is the one thing that is out of your control, because your guest audio is based on what they have as far as equipment is concerned. It's based on their microphone. It's based on their setup. It's based on whatever it is that they are dealing with. Now, that is, I guess, a mindset, a mental thing that that the host is gonna have to get over, because a lot of us get very dead set in this fact that we go like, well, our guest audio doesn't sound great, and we know that this can sound better. It can sound better, if your guest is willing to make it sound better.
Right.
That's the only way. And we have to remember that when we're recording remote podcasts or remote interviews, that the audio is being fed over a line. It's being fed over an internet line, and you're going to be losing some of that quality on the transfer, especially if you're recording it into an Adobe Audition. Now, if you say to me, well, yeah, there's a different way or there's a better way to get this, I will say, I don't know if there's a better way to get it, because even in radio, we use ISDN lines to do remote recordings or remote broadcasts out on location, and still the quality on that is not as clear as if you were doing it direct or a DI into a mixing board. So just know that you're going to have some of those inconsistencies in sound, but you can always make your sound better if you're recording directly into a software like Adobe Audition or an Audacity. So if you're asking me what to upgrade first, I would say upgrade your microphone and upgrade your software. Try to start recording directly into your software like an Audition or Audacity. I mean, really, ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're just doing it on a Blue Yeti microphone and a Zoom call, and that's all you want to do, that can be perfect. But I know podcasters say, like, man, I really want to sound like a Pat Flynn, or I want to sound like a Jeff C, or I want to sound like a Guy Kawasaki. They're going to have to upgrade their equipment, and that's typically going to come in the form of a microphone, software. I'm sorry, a microphone, a mixing board, and their software.
Yeah, I want to pull up some questions here because, like Nancy, and in fact, we thought about doing this for Guy, and I know like Jay Bear used to do this. She agrees about the mic. If you, that's not it. Send them a mic and offer free training. That's a great one. That's like Jay used to send people a podcast mic to make sure they would have it. And then our friend Gary Stockton over on YouTube says, there is one guest hack I do. If my guest audio is terrible, I have them place their mobile phone in front of them and record voice memo while we are talking, and then send them the file. Oh. That's a great hack, Gary. I never even thought about that.
That's a cool hack, actually.
Yeah. So
we have a question from
because I have some friends who do a true crime podcast, and the way they record both their audio on Audition. So one is in New York and the other one is here, and they do their calls on FaceTime together. And so they don't do them on Zoom; they do them on FaceTime together, and then they record everything on Zoom. So there's all these different hacks that people do utilize. My friends Dino from the Gary and Dino show, they do something very similar as well. To have, if you want to have clean audio, they figured out a way to where they're just recording the individual tracks themselves, and then in post-production, Gary goes in and he matches it all together, and then it sounds like they were in a studio together.
Well, so, and also it's important to have backup. Like I always say, like when I say I'm starting the podcast machine, I'm hitting record on that, but Ecamm also records it. Restream does as well, but that way I have backups in case, I have a dropout on something or something that didn't hit record right, or there's something. I always have those backups. So Grace, you had a question you were going to ask? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to point out Catherine Long had a question here. She said, I'm using a mixer, but switched to an interface a couple years back. I'm going to be doing a co-host show in 2022. Should I switch back to a mixer?
Let me read that question again. So I was using a mixer, but switched to an interface a couple years back. Catherine, can you tell me which interface you were using? If you're looking for better audio and you're looking to co-host a show, and it depends, because you have to look at the co-hosting. Is your co-host going to be in the same room, or is the co-host going to be remote? So, I mean, if you're doing co-host remote, I would say you could just be using your interface like a Zoom or anything like that. Because it's just going to be you recording audio someone remotely. So you just got to differentiate who's the co-host and who's the guest, right? But if it's someone who is going to be in the studio with you, then probably you have to use a mixing board, because there's that only way that you can capture that audio is by having someone in the if you have them in the studio or in your recording setup, you got to have that mic there. It would not make any sense if you threw them in another room of your house and then you're doing it on Zoom. So you might as well just have the extra microphone ready to go, and then you can patch in whoever is going to be doing the interview. If it's a remote recording, you could do it that way. So, I mean, there's multiple configurations of how you can do this. You just got to make the one that's going to be the easiest for you.
So our friend Chris Stone gives this advice. He says upgrading the room sound treatment is number one for him. So when he went and treated his room, which if you don't know what that means, it's like putting those sound absorption panels on. I'm lucky because in here I have this wooden background and also have a wooden ceiling. So that's like what you would see at a recording studio. A lot of times they have a lot of wood to absorb that sound. And so it does really well for me. So, but yeah, treating the room so you don't have that weird echo or that reverb or something can really help your sound as well. So
Ian pointed out. Pointed out training your guests to wear headphones too is that he says my biggest issue is trying to get my guests to wear headphones so you're not getting that echo or what the sound.
We fight that at Guy's podcast as well a lot of times.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of post production that I have to do, and
yes,
by the time Jeff gives it to me, I'm still doing work on it. So there's Guy's got a lot of people working on his podcast, and I'm happy to do that for him because we can make it sound really good.
Yeah. So I want to get this. This is from Retro Turban, I think, and this is a super chat that came over, I think, on your channel, Shannon. So I want to make sure that we answer this.
I got a super chat.
I think so, or I don't, or one of us did. So I think if you shared it,
oh no, maybe it's not a super chat. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Anyway. But he hasn't been plugging into social media in my episodes, but I want to start doing that. Should I do that at the beginning of the episodes or at the end for like podcast?
So that is preferential. Now you can do it like how we did here in this podcast. Jeff plugged whatever he needed to plug in the very beginning, typically the highest point of listening. But you also have to remember, sometimes, the behaviors of how people listen to podcasts. I mean, if you're someone who's on the go and you're like, I don't need to hear any of this stuff, I'm just going to boom, fast forward all the way through. They'll just go past 1 minute because they know that either the spot is 1 minute or maybe 2 minutes. If you listen to sometimes, whose podcast was it that I was listening to a while back? Either way, it was like 5 minutes of ads. And I was like, oh my God. And I just had to keep going because I just wanted to get to the content because the title of the podcast was so great. So to answer that question about, when you should be talking about your social media, you could talk about it at the very end, especially if the content that you are talking about is engaging and it keeps people all the way to the very end. Or you can always do a real quick mid-roll. I call it a baked-in mid-roll where you're just saying, okay, before we go into the next question, just want to remind you that we have you can follow us over on our social media channels where we share these podcasts out, and we share a lot of other great tips and tools that will help you with your, could be, health and wellness journey. So go on over to our social media. You can find us at, Shanman Wellness, on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, wherever. So you got to find these ways in which you can get that out. But also the title of your podcast, or maybe even having those inside of your I guess, podcast page on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever, and the links that go back to your website. Those are always great. So the way I try to avoid like over saturation of saying, go to Twitter, go to Facebook, go to this, go to that, go to that, I just say, head on over to theshanman.com. You can find all the information there, and you can find where my social media channels are. That's as simple as it can get. Plus, you do want to have a website. You want to have a home to where you can get people to go and check out what you are publishing and learn a little bit more about you. That's your storefront. That's you. If you're trying to make this thing into a business, you got to have a website. And I mean, if you're talking about, going back to your question, Grace, if you're talking about like equipment, I would almost lump having a website in there as equipment. I mean, it's almost like having equipment, even though it's software. You got to have that eventually at some point in time because people are going to want to use or learn more about you, especially if you are assisting the community in growing and developing, doing whatever. And if your website is that place where people can get that information, then you want to have that website. Plus, if we want to get into it later on down the line, we will get into that later on down the line as far as a monetization play is concerned. It really comes in handy whenever you have remarketing tags and pixels, Facebook pixels on your website as well, because you want to drive them there. This is a question that came up yesterday in a group that I was reading. Someone was asking about how do I grow my podcast and all this. And so we can get into that later at some point in time. But, but it was like, can we use paid ads? And, I was like, yeah, you could totally use paid ads, but it comes at a cost. So we can get into that a little bit later.
So one of the things I do want to say, just real quick about, when to put in your social media and your ads and stuff. I would, when you first start a podcast, if you are really seriously thinking about monetization, and this even goes like for other types of marketing, is you want to train your audience. So I'm getting ready to launch a new podcast. I don't really even have any sponsors, but I've put in my affiliates in there to train my listeners from the beginning that this will be monetized. So you want to think long-term too, is like where you're going to put stuff. Are you going to have it? If you're eventually thinking you're going to monetize your podcast, make something up. Audible, you could go get a thing for Audible, and that's what a lot of podcasts do, is they drop that in there. So you're at least training your audience that this will be an ad break at this time. So anyway, just really quickly.
No, that's great. I mean, that is something that I've been saying for years. I mean, I should have said that, but I'm glad that you said it, Jeff.
I learned it from
because yeah, it's a behavioral thing. So if we were to take, what I like to relate to whenever it comes to podcasting, I'd like to relate it back to radio, because radio is basically the blueprint for what podcasting is doing now these days. So when you're jumping into a lot of these companies where there are these networks that they're doing sponsorships and whatnot, you'll be listening to a podcast and then you hear the ad break, right? So you hear this ad break. So you could do it through, I'm not a fan of those networks just because, there's a cut that's being taken. Of course, you have to have 1 million downloads to be a part of those. Well, not all of them, but you have to have a lot of downloads in order to be considered for those, right? But at the end of the day, when we're talking about programming your podcast, you want to create a behavior to your audience to let them know that, hey, this is going to be an ad break. Like Jeff said, this is going to be an ad break. And there are going to be different types of ads that are coming in. So let's take, for example, like Guy Kawasaki's podcast that we crested over 100 episodes. Mm-hmm. And Jeff came to me and he said, we're going to have, we're moving over to HubSpot. We're no longer doing the Remarkable sponsorship. And so he said, there's a couple things that we need to do here. How can we do that? Well, in my mind, I went directly into radio mode. And I thought, well, this is basically now ad breaks is what they are. But they're just baked into the podcast. We don't have to go through a network. We don't have to go through anyone. These are our own ad breaks. So when you're creating and developing a behavior, the behaviors can be from tease music to let them know that there's going to be a break that's going to be coming up. Maybe there's not, but if you listen to Guy's podcast, I always create a music bed where there's a point that is being made, and that tease music always leads into another teaser, or I guess a spoken teaser about what's coming up in the podcast in, say, 20 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, depending on how long the podcast is going to be. And then it breaks into a commercial break, and then we rejoin it with Guy's brand music, and then we rejoin it by saying, you're listening to Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People. And then it goes back into programming. So I know I went a little fast in that, but if you go listen to Guy's podcast, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's all about the behaviors, about listening to that, because then you're able to maneuver and get whatever sponsorships you want, or behaviors, or even put in your affiliates in those spots as well. So that's a good way of doing it. I don't know. Do you have something else to add, Jeff?
No, that was good. So I just wanted to, since we had that super chat, kind of jump into that real quick, because I do want to go back and talk a little bit more, especially for people who are just getting started. It's confusing when they say, okay, I've got to get editing software, but I've also got to have a host. And a lot of people they think they can just host their podcast on their website. So let's talk about the best places to host. So, I teased you a little bit before the show started about talking about some of these, because you have some opinions on them, and it's really interested on them, because you have everything from, like, we use Simplecast for guys. I've used Libsyn before. There's Burberry. There's all these different podcasting hosts, and they're becoming, I love competition, because that is best for all of us. But what should we be looking for in a podcast host, which is where the audio files live, so you don't get hit on your podcast, and why that's important?
Yeah. So don't do it on your website. I mean, this has been something that's been talked about for many, many years. I mean, the people who jump in and they start this thing out there go, oh, wow. What they discover is they maybe go to GoDaddy, or they do Bluehost or HostGator, and they're like, wow, I got all this space on my host, on my website, and I could just start hosting audio. They don't realize that when it comes down to putting audio on a website, there comes metadata that needs to be coded for the publication platforms. So what I'm talking about when I talk about metadata, I'm talking about the show art. I'm talking about the descriptions of the individual podcast, the description of the actual podcast overall. We're talking about now, especially with Apple and Spotify and everyone jumping into the monetization game, now there's all these little things. Do you want to contribute to, subscribe to this podcast? So there's all these little things that go into it. But the other thing that I think people need to think about is whenever, if they're thinking, oh, I need to put this on my website, is that websites will not update. If you need to update your audio, maybe you made a mistake. We do those with guys podcast all the time. Maybe we need to change an ad out, or he said something different. He needs to change the intro. We can replace the audio without affecting the statistics of the actual download itself. So when it comes down to looking for what you need as far as hosting is concerned, do not post it on your website. Post it with a hosting provider like a Libsyn, Simplecast, Buzzsprout. I would personally, I would stay away from the free ones. I would stay away from Anchor, even though they are good for the beginning podcaster. Let's put it this way: if you're serious about podcasting, I would stay off Anchor. All right. I mean, that's in my opinion. I mean, I know there's people who have very strong opinions about, oh, Anchor is great for me. It does all these things, but I stay away from it because I look at this from a business perspective. If you're trying to take your podcast to the next level, you want to have the customer service and you want to make sure that they have the reliability of the service that is going to be publishing your podcast. So some of the comments that come in on my YouTube channel say like, well, I tried to contact customer service at Anchor and they keep sending me these help articles and I can't get the podcast to update. I can't do anything like that. Maybe they fixed that now. I don't know. Maybe someone from Anchor has fixed that. I just know that because they are now a part of Spotify, they're really pushing this monetization thing. But free sometimes isn't always free because it's coming at a cost. It's coming at the service itself sometimes. So it'll work for some people. It'll work for, I guess quite a few people. But I see a lot of podcasters that are out there who are doing it and they're just trying to figure out the game. But when you're using a Libsyn, you're using a Simplecast, Buzzsprout, whatever it may be, Blueberry, you're going to get the service that you deserve and you're getting the updates that you deserve. Now, for me, I was using Buzzsprout for the longest time. And I think, Buzzsprout and Simplecast, I believe, are the best, but there are other people who will say like Spreaker is the best. It's all based on your needs. As far as business is concerned, I use Kajabi. And I don't want to make this a big Kajabi ad or anything like that. It's just the platform that I use. It's my website platform. It's my podcast hosting platform. It's my landing page platform. It's my email marketing platform. It's the all-in-one that I use. And when I use Kajabi, it does basically the same exact thing as, say, Buzzsprout or Simplecast. The only difference with Kajabi is that with Kajabi, I am able to create, say, a paid podcast if I wanted to do that. So I can have a public podcast and then I could say have a paid private RSS feed podcast that I can send directly to my subscribers if I wanted to do that. And I'm getting a monthly subscription. So now this is where we run into the whole monetization. We jump into monetization. I would say when we think about our podcast and we think about the hosting, we have to really come and step back and ask ourselves, what is the ultimate objective of our podcast? Is our podcast to get downloads? And with downloads, what does that mean? Does that mean we're going to be a lot of downloads so that we're trying to get sponsors? Or am I just trying to build this into a business so that I can help and serve other people? Maybe the objective is a little bit different. You may be doing coaching programs. You may be doing paid podcasting. You may be doing who knows what. You may have to jump into something that's a little bit different. You may have to jump into something that that is more like a Kajabi, where it's more sales driven and it's about you and your brand. But if it's about sponsorships, maybe you stick with Libsyn, Simplecast, Buzzsprout. You might stick with those. And that you're just going to have to work towards getting more listeners so that you can approach sponsors or maybe join some type of network to say like, oh yeah, this is how I'm going to start making my money. Again, all that stuff is going to come at a cost. It even comes at a cost when it comes down to doing, say, a Kajabi. There is a cost that you have to pay, not in terms of financial cost. It's going to come at the cost of, say, how big is your audience? And maybe your audience isn't that big, but maybe what you're offering is enough to start and help develop your business.
That is all great stuff. So that was a little mini course right there, folks. So that's really, because it's really important that a lot of people don't think about this. But another thing that people don't think about, and I know, Grace, you have this question, so I'll let you go ahead and ask it.
Distribution. So I read a stat somewhere where there's like 66 million podcast episodes living online somewhere. I'm sure that number is growing. And according to the stat, there's like a 500,000 of those podcasts are on Apple Podcasts, which of course still growing, no doubt. But of course, there's Spotify, there's Amazon Music, there's Stitcher, there's Audible. These are all these different places. I feel like every time I turn around, there's another platform, another content distribution service that's offering podcasts. I can't wait for Netflix to launch podcasts, right? Like this is where we're at now. And so I wanted to know, there's all these different places that you can distribute to. Can you tell us what is the submission process for getting your podcasts, I guess, distributed on these platforms, particularly Apple? I know Apple tends to be a few hoops. There's a lot of articles written about how to get on Apple Podcasts, but
Yeah.
there's a lot to choose from. Tell us about what that is, what it's like to navigate this process, and how do you decide and choose where to go?
So when we look at the statistics, and I mean, I'm sure you can ask someone who's more qualified about this than I am, who does research on this. But when you look at the distribution as far as how people are listening or where they're listening, there's been recent articles saying Spotify is now, competing with Apple at the top spot of the distribution platforms. And so still, though, to this day, Apple Podcasts is the platform that most people are listening to their podcasts. I don't know, people here who might have podcasts can look at their statistics and they can see that probably the majority of them come from Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Now, how many do we need to get on, and how do we get on those? All right. So my philosophy on this is that you go where the people are. You go where the people are hanging out at the bar, where the popularity is, right? But you also want to be in the area where people there's total introverts who don't want to go to the bar. They want to go to their own little watering hole, right?
Right.
And so you have to also kind of cater to them as well. But for the most part, when it comes down to the distribution process, I would allocate time for yourself to say, okay, if I'm going to have a hard podcast launch date, maybe you want to soften that up a little bit, because the process of getting on these platforms and which ones you need to be on can vary. So let's take, for instance, you talked about Apple Podcasts. Which ones do we need to be on? Well, definitely you need to be on Apple Podcasts and you need to be on Spotify. All right. So when you go through the submission process, if you use a service, I don't know, Jeff, you set up Guy's podcast on Simplecast, but I've set myself up on Buzzsprout and Kajabi. On Buzzsprout, I know Buzzsprout's got a really great service for hosting where you set up the podcast, you do all the uploading, you get your everything up and ready to go. And then they have basically all the platforms that listed on their website or on their hosting platform that will tell you where you need to be listening your podcast, with instructions included and links that go directly to the areas in which you need to submit your podcast. So that is a really cool feature of Buzzsprout. Kajabi does the same thing, but they're only listing the top podcast platforms that most people are listening, but they're still working on getting more. I have a guide where I give a list of all those. So you can get this information from different sources, right? But what happens is that you are going through and you're going to have to start submitting through the Apple Podcast process, all right? So I talked about this hard launch date, right? You set a hard launch date. You say, I'm going to drop a podcast on January 2nd. So that's when I'm going to do it. Well, we have to think about, okay, if you're going to drop it on January 2nd, are you going to drop it on January 2nd or are you submitting on January 2nd? Like, let's think about this, all right? So when you submit to Apple Podcasts, you submit and you'll get the RSS feed from Buzzsprout and you'll get the RSS feed from Kajabi or wherever, Simplecast. You'll submit that. You submit it to Apple. It may take it. I've had podcasts approved the same day,
Right.
but I've also had podcasts approved 2 weeks later.
Right.
So it varies. So you have to give yourself some time in order to get all these podcasts approved. If you're going through Google Podcasts, I've had podcasts approved 2 days later, and then, other podcasts approved, just 5 days later. It just really all depends. Every platform is going to be a little bit different. So that's something that I think you should think about when you're going into that process of getting ready to launch. You need to have at least 1 to 2 episodes uploaded already. It used to be 3, but I think they're cool with now just having 1 or 2 ready to go. So make sure you have that ready. So I would say the process would start with, first, upload your audio and get your podcast ready to go and have them kind of hold in a holding pattern on your hosting provider. Next, go into the different syndication platforms and then learn and figure out which platforms accept the RSS feed. Some will accept an RSS feed. Others are just pulling the feed from Apple Podcasts or wherever,
Mm-hmm.
so you don't have to do any submission there. But Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you're going to have to really gauge, a few weeks, or maybe give yourself a couple of weeks based on the approval process of getting your podcast out into the world. So that's just
Right.
something to think about. And then after that, then you can start promoting your podcast, go hog wild on it, and then start gaining some traction. But I think the most important thing is just to give yourself time. If you're going to set a hard launch date, set it way ahead, so
Right.
that or I would say not set it way ahead. I would say prepare for your for your launch date, so that you can make sure that you hit that hard launch date.
Yeah, so exactly. So because they could be different. Like that's one thing. And so Nancy says, she's not like an iPhone or an Apple person. She's Spotify for me for listening. And she also says that Libsyn will walk you through distributions to all the different platforms. Kajabi was incredibly easy. The same thing with Simplecast. It's really easy.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I want people to understand is like, you don't have to pick where you're going to be distributed. You don't have to say, oh, should I pick Apple or Spotify? You can do them all. And most of all these platforms will walk you through the submission process. But Shannon's point, and since a lot of marketers are watching, is we always like to have a launch, campaign. The problem is it may get approved at Apple, but it's not in Spotify, or vice versa. It won't happen at the same time. So that's why Shannon was saying you have to wait till they're approved and they go live and they're being distributed. That's when you want to do your launch campaign. Otherwise, people won't know where to go to subscribe to your podcast, and some of the links won't work and all that stuff. So that's what you have to take in mind.
I think there was like a lot of miscommunication many years ago, where there were people saying like, this is your launch date and you got to do it, and you're going to affect the rankings of your podcast. And if you don't do that, then it's going to affect your rankings. And I'm like, I don't even worry about that, because at the end of the day, I'm in it for the long game.
Right.
And I know that the approval process is going to be different for everything. You as the marketer, you as the business owner, you've got to have your own playbook in place. Don't listen to what Apple Podcasts and the algorithm, whatever. Have your business is the number one thing. So focus on your business and utilize the platforms as the vehicle to get attention to your business.
Yeah.
Well, I love the idea of launching with several episodes too, because it's frustrating when you find a new show and you're like, there's only one episode and when is the next one? And it allows people to, get to know you right away, especially with our new binge culture.
That's very true.
Yeah.
And it's, I think the stats, and it's probably even shorter now, but it used to be that most podcasts don't go past the 7th episode. And so when they see that you're there and you're consistent, they realize like nothing hacks me off is when I'm binging something and then I find out through the internet that like, oh, they didn't do the next season. And so you're left hanging. I'm like, I'm not watching this anymore. And it's kind of the same thing with podcasting is people want to make sure you're going to be around. I want to go because Shannon, I know that a lot of people do interview style podcasts. Like we talked about Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People, where he interviews those kind of people like Jane Goodall and some of the other really high profile people. So how do you get guests? And I know with you, with the radio station, I've seen you interview these, top tier bands and Metallica and all these things. So
not Metallica, but I wish.
but you've got some really big ones on there. So a lot of questions, a lot of people say like, how do I get guests? How do I get good guests for our shows? Do you have a process for vetting people? How do you find out? How do you get guests when you're first starting? I know that's a big question for people who want to start a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it varies. I mean, because my process isn't exactly like how I think a lot of podcasters' processes are. I just go and ask. I'm asking. I'm like, hey, I think you have something really great that you can offer to my podcast audience. Would you like to come on my podcast and start, just talk for about 30 minutes to an hour? And, I typically, if I say like, hey, can you talk for about 45 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, they'll typically go the full hour, so
Right.
That's what ends up happening. Because if you can engage the conversation, it's great. But there are many different ways you can get a guest. So I typically, if you want to get a big guest, let's say you want to get a Seth Godin, well, you probably won't get Seth Godin unless you know him or someone who does know him. But for the most part, what I would say start doing is that you just start with your little guests, because there's a lot of people who have a lot of great talents or a lot of great knowledge that can still offer value to your podcast. And so I would start with those people. I mean, some of these people don't even have to be on the internet. They could be lawyers, doctors, fitness instructors. They could be anyone, but they still have the knowledge. Everyone has knowledge. So, you as a podcaster, you have to think to yourself, well, if I'm going to bring this person on and they don't have an audience, sometimes you can say like, it's okay. As long as the value is there, I can give it. But maybe you're looking to grow your audience. You're trying to find someone. Still, maybe you need to just start getting people to be acquainted with your style of podcasting. Get guests that don't have audiences in the beginning. You don't have to have a guest that has 100,000 people on Instagram who will follow your podcast. You don't have to do that. You're just looking for the value. And then once what happens is that as you go further down the line of episodes and you start putting in requests to people, and you say like, hey, I do a podcast that has this and that. You now have the clout to say like, I've done 52 podcasts, a year's worth of podcasts. And these are the topics that we talk about. I would love to have you on my podcast, and I would love to see if you would be willing to share some of your information and knowledge to my audience. Sometimes they'll say yes. Sometimes they'll say no. It just really depends. My process is really more about providing the value, because when people jump out of my feed, they see that the value of starting a podcast or, marketing a podcast, those podcast episodes are going to be there for people to consume. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for to share the necessary value to them. I'm not in the business of sharing content just for the sake of sharing content if it's going to lose listeners. That I want to share content so that I can get it out to them and it's important to them. So, figure out your own process. But I mean, I know you have a different process of how you do it, Jeff. I know you do it too, Grace. My process varies differently at the radio station. It's typically with someone who's working for the record company. It comes to us and says, hey, do you want, would Shannon like to be interviewing someone from, I don't know, Bullet for My Valentine or whatever. And I get the power to say yes or no. That's up to me, But if you're a podcaster looking to get a guest, start small. Start with the guests that, that don't have audiences. Just provide value. That's it.
Yeah. One of the things
on the flip side of that, like a lot of business owners, a lot of marketers, a lot of people within organizations want to be interviewed by podcasters because they have information to share. They want to promote their product or what have you. So what's an effective and reliable way to get your name out there and let people know that you're open to being interviewed without being super slimy or spammy?
Yeah. I mean, that all comes down to the content development that you're going to create. I would like the bio. The bio is always a great one, but this is really now more, you're now diving into the topic of like, you're trying to sell yourself basically to these people. You can promote yourself. You can reach out to people on different podcasts, jump into the Apple Podcast store. There are services out there that, say like, we can get you on different podcasts. I'm kind of, it's not that I question those services. I'm just not trying to be on every podcast. I'm trying to be on every relevant podcast. So my podcast is about, or if I want to try to promote my business, I want to try and be on, say, for this instance, I want to be on YouTube channels. I want to be on marketing people's channels. I want to be on their channels to be talking about what I am promoting. If they say no, they have my information. I can always circle back. But when I'm crafting that email, I'm not crafting, like I got an email yesterday where this guy was like, hey, you want to grow your podcast? I can help you grow your podcast in 90 days and make $100,000. I'm like, God, this is so disgusting. I hate when people do that because it's false promises. Not everyone can do that. And typically what that guy's looking for, he's looking for an investment so he can make money. Whereas I'm just looking to help provide value. I'm helping to provide value where I can. Now, do I want to make money in the end? Yeah, I do want to make money in the end, but I don't want to sound so gross and salesy with that. So I just provide my credentials. Hey, I'm a 20-year radio veteran who's been teaching podcasting for the past 10 years. I edit up podcasts from small business owners, and the most recent one is Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast. Here are the links that you can go ahead and check out. I would love to be considered to be a part of your podcast and help share the knowledge with your podcast audience if you feel that it's a great fit. There you go.
Right. And I get those pitches all the time that you mentioned before as well. And you can tell a lot of times they don't even listen to the podcast. They're like, this guy would be perfect for your podcast. He's a vacuum cleaner salesman. And I'm like, what? Why would what?
I've gotten those in the last couple of weeks. I'm just like, I just have to start throwing them in spam.
So Mike has this great comment, and I think it's really important. He goes, start building relationships today, and you'll find tomorrow's guests. And I think that's really, really important. The other thing is, and what we try to really do on this show, is we make the show about the guests. And we repurpose this like crazy, and you'll hardly ever see me or Grace more than me on those clips, because I want to make this show about the guests and their knowledge and providing value that way to my audience. And that's what I do with those clips. The good thing is is guests want to come on the show because they know that I do that, and that they know that I share them out and I try to make the show about them. So that's one way if you're trying to get guests. And when you do get those guests, make it easy for them to share the content. Restream does a really great job with that with this new pairs feature. But when you're making, graphics, whatever, make it really easy for them to share it, and then highlight them when it's over. That has probably been the best way for us to grow this show, because it just works. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always about your guests. If you're the host, it's always about
Right.
your guests. So highlight them. I mean, make them the star.
Yeah. And who are you again? Never mind.
And the audience.
And the audience. Yes.
Jeff does a really good job of answering questions and bringing up people up too. So that is another big part of that too, is serving the audience.
So speaking of serving our audience,
the new dynamic. Yeah, the audience now, with the way we do things, that's the new dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of our audience and giving them great information, do not forget about our friends over at Ecamm. See how smooth that was? You can find out more about them at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. And I hope you guys know by what I said last week and throughout the show is that I love it's not just the product and the service, but it's the people there. They've got a great community. They really help you learn the software. They listen to what you guys need. And so I'm so excited they've been a sponsor for the show from the beginning. So find out more about them at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. And we may have to do a part 3, Shannon. I mean, I'm telling you, we only have 5 minutes left. And we really didn't get into monetization. So so I know you get this question a lot, so let's make it really as short as possible, and we'll have you back to talk about this. But everybody wants to make money, and most of the podcasters that I know either start as a hobby, or they don't even start as a hobby. They go right into the business side of things. What's the best way for somebody to monetize their podcast? You're muted.
That's the radio station in me. I mute myself. So there are multiple ways you can monetize your podcast. There's so many different ways that you can monetize. Yesterday Grace sent me an article on the different ways you can monetize a podcast. I was like, yeah, these are all great ways. So, I mean, let's just look real quick at the different ways. I'll just kind of name some off the top of my head. There is, the donation, the subscription model. There is making money by creating products for your audience. There are courses, coaching. I mean, there's sponsorships. There's all these different ways you can monetize, and podcasters can get lost in the mix of it all. Do I have to do it all? Do I have to do monetization through sponsorships? And do I need to have a coaching program? And do I need to, there are many different ways. So this all comes back to the question, what is your business objective? What is your objective? So when I ask about what's your objective is, yes, I want to make money, but we have to ask the underlying objective. Who are you trying to serve? What are you trying to do? Ultimately, what are you trying to do? So I personally believe that it's a bad philosophy to follow if you're just doing it to make money, because if you're doing it to make money, it looks very self-serving, right? So yes, we want to make money. We want to help this become a part of our livelihood, but there has to be an exchange of something. So the exchange may be coming in the form of laughs, but like when I talked about the dynamic of what we have with an audience, it's about a guest, but now it's about, we have a live audience who's here watching. But you have to also remember that when people are listening to a podcast, they're consumed in you. So you need to make it about them. So you need to always be having it facing towards them. Your content has to be facing towards them. So when we're talking about monetization, what is it that you can offer to them? Could it come in the form of a funny t-shirt? Could it come in the form of saying, hey, look, in exchange for all this great free information, I would love it if you could contribute to my podcast. $5 a month. It helps me help develop the podcast. So you're giving free information that is valuable, but hopefully they can do that. Now that's a little bit different, but you can also do something like, there's a lot of people who use Patreon. Mm-hmm. And so they give a lot of bonus content. They give extra episodes of their podcast because that's what typically people want to do. I mean, you can do that. Not every objective is going to be the same. And not every objective is going to be something that works. It's not a one size fits all. Like my friends who, run the Crime and Sports podcast and Small Town Murder podcast, they have millions of downloads, and all they do, how they're making their money, are based off of their Patreon and PayPal donations. All right. And then of course they've gotten so big now that they have other lines of income that have just come forth. So I would say in the beginning, figure out what the one thing is that you want to start setting yourself up for. when it comes to monetization. For me, if you're a business and you're not like in the comedy niche, or you're not in the true crime niche or anything like that, if you're starting from the business side of things, you need to start developing and building a website so that you can start collecting emails, so that you can start promoting that you're going to eventually start saying, hey, here's a plan where you can subscribe to extra podcasts, or things like that. I mean, I could go really deep into this.
Well, you're going to have to go really deep on part 3 with Shannon Hernandez, because once again, we got so many great questions and so many awesome topics that we talked about that, you know what? You should teach a course on this, Shannon.
Oh, weird.
I know. So where can
Maybe you
people
should build a business around podcasting?
Yes,
I don't know, Shannon. We're full of
tell
ideas.
people where they can find you and get some more of all things Shannon Hernandez.
Yeah, you can find me at theshanman.com. I have my course on, the basics of, I wouldn't even say the basics. It's just learning how to use Adobe Audition to build out your podcast. So that is available there for you to go ahead and check out. And I got other products that are up there as well. How to monetize your podcast, audiobook. I've got, podcast launch checklists and so much more that is up there. So go to theshanman.com. You can find it there.
Yeah, it's got tons of resources. And there's nobody else I go to when it comes to podcasting and audio stuff. When Guy came to me about doing the Remarkable People, helping him produce that podcast, the first person I called was Shannon. I didn't even go to anybody else. It was straight there. So make sure you guys check him out. He's got a ton of great information at theshanman.com. But someone else who is equally awesome and amazing is the amazing Grace Duffy. Grace, where can people find out more about you and all things Grace?
Well, I am the video content manager over at Restream. You can find out more about Restream at restream.io. And I'm here every week with Jeff, except when I'm not. So you can find me here.
So, so I could not do the show without Grace. She is amazing. This has been so much fun. Thank you guys for all your questions and your comments and all your shares and everything that you guys do. This is also a podcast. You can find us if you just go search at any of your favorite podcast places. Just do a search for Social Media News Live. We'd love for you guys to leave a rating and review. It really helps us out. And we will be back next week with another great guest and topic. You can find us at YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the places. And we would love to know what you'd love us to talk about. Is there some subject that we have not covered yet that you really want to know for 2022? We would love to do that. So drop us a DM in the comments. And with that, our next show will be on Friday, December 10th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central. We really appreciate all you guys. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Shannon. Thankful for all you guys in the comments. Gary, Mike, Jeff, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you guys next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. You're looking like a hot mess.
No, it's actually a powerful live streaming app for Mac called Ecamm Live. You can add some overlays to your video, whether it's a simple graphic or you want to have some titles or other info at the bottom of your screen. You can even add animated overlays like this one or this one. And you can add branded overlays to frame you and your guests and look like a real legit broadcast. And you can save each layout as a scene and switch between them with the press of a button.